Have you ever read a verse in the Bible that sent a chill down your spine? A verse that felt out of place, like a key to a much darker hidden story that nobody ever talks about in church? I'm talking about Genesis 6, the mention of the sons of God, the daughters of men, and the giants that were born from their union. Most people just skip over it, but you've felt it, haven't you? That feeling that you're standing on the edge of a terrifying secret. What if he told you that single verse is the key to understanding the first apocalypse, the true origin of demons, and a cosmic war that is still being fought in the shadows of our world? What you are about to learn is not just an ancient myth. It's the shocking truth about the Nephilim, the giant sons of the fallen angels. This knowledge is so powerful that it will change everything you thought you knew about good and evil. So many of you who are drawn to these deep truths watch our videos, yet an incredible number of you are not subscribed. If you feel that pull, if you believe there is more to God's word than what's on the surface, take 1 second and click that subscribe button right now. Do not click away. Stay with me until the very end, because understanding this terrifying story is crucial. What you are about to discover is a missing piece of the puzzle of your faith, and learning the truth about the giants of Genesis might just be the key to understanding the spiritual battles you face in your own life. All right? Pull up a chair and let's talk, just you and me. I want you to think about a verse that millions have read, but few have truly grappled with. It's right there in Genesis 6:4. And it says, "There were giants in the earth in those days, and also after that, when the sons of God came in unto the daughters of men, and they bare children to them, the same became mighty men, which were of old, men of renown." Now, isn't it funny how we've been conditioned to read that? We hear mighty men and men of renown, and our minds instantly conjure images of legendary heroes, like the Greek demigods, Hercules, Achilles, you name it. We picture these towering figures as protectors, as founders of great cities, as the stuff of glorious legend. The Bible itself calls them famous, so they must have been good, right? That's the easy interpretation, the one that lets us sleep soundly at night. It's the version of the story that's comfortable, that fits neatly into our sanitized understanding of the ancient world. It's a classic case of seeing what we want to see, of glossing over the terrifying implications that are lurking just beneath the surface of the words. But I'm here to ask you to look deeper, to challenge that comfortable assumption. What if our Sunday school picture of these beings is completely, utterly wrong? Let's really break it down. The text doesn't say they were heroes. It says they were mighty and renowned. Well, a tyrant can be mighty. A monster can be renowned. Fame, my friend, is not the same as goodness. A wildfire is also renowned for its power, but you wouldn't call it a blessing, would you? We have to strip away our modern biases and read the text for what it is, a stark and frankly bone-chilling statement of fact. It's a prelude to the most catastrophic event in human history, the Great Flood. Do you really think God would introduce the heroes of the age right before he decides to wipe the slate clean? It just doesn't add up. There's a disconnect there, a piece of the puzzle that feels profoundly out of place. This isn't a story about heroes. It's the prologue to an apocalypse. It's the setup for a horror story of cosmic proportions, and these so-called men of renown are not the protagonists we've been led to believe they were. They are something else entirely. The truth is, we are not talking about valiant heroes. We are talking about the Nephilim. We are talking about the giants of Genesis. The very presence of these beings on earth was an abomination, a cosmic stain that corrupted the whole of creation. Think about it not as a heroic saga, but as the patient zero event for a world-ending plague. These weren't just big guys who were good at fighting. They were an invasive species, an unholy fusion of heaven and earth that had no business existing. Their fame wasn't born of noble deeds, but of terror and domination. They were renowned the way a lion is renowned among a flock of sheep, for its power to kill and devour. We're being told that their existence, this unnatural blending of divine and human, was a primary catalyst for God's judgment. This verse isn't a celebration, it's an indictment. It's the opening charge in a divine courtroom, setting the stage for why the world had to be washed away. We're at the very beginning of a terrifying revelation about the true nature of these creatures. This isn't just ancient history, it's a lesson about spiritual contamination. Imagine you have a glass of pure water. It represents God's perfect creation. Now, someone adds just a single drop of poison to it. The entire glass is now corrupted, unsafe, and undrinkable. The Nephilim were that drop of poison. Their emergence wasn't a random event or a quirky footnote in history. It was a deliberate act of rebellion that tainted the human bloodline and the very fabric of the earth. So, the question I want you to hold in your heart as we continue this journey is this: were these giants of Genesis really the heroes of the old world, or were they the monsters that brought it all crashing down? Were they a blessing to be admired, or a curse that necessitated the first global apocalypse? The answer to that question changes everything you think you know about the world before Noah, about the purpose of the flood, and even about the spiritual battles we face today. Get ready, because we're about to peel back the layers of this well-known but deeply misunderstood passage. We are going to venture past the comfortable tales and into the shadows of the text, into the stories that have been tucked away and forbidden. Books for millennia. This is the hook. The thread that once pulled unravels a tapestry of rebellion, cosmic crime, and unimaginable horror. What we're beginning to uncover here is the terrifying truth behind one of the Bible's most cryptic verses. A truth that reveals the real reason the world had to be drowned. It all started with a choice, a transgression so profound that it ripped a hole in the order of creation itself, a union that was never meant to be. This is where the story of the Nephilim truly begins, not with heroism, but with a heinous act of betrayal against heaven itself. So, how did this nightmare even begin? How did creation go so horribly wrong that these terrifying giants of Genesis could walk the earth? Well, my friend, the origin of this story isn't rooted in the soil of our world, but in the celestial realm, born from a breathtaking act of betrayal. This wasn't some unforeseen accident or a flaw in the divine plan. The birth of the Nephilim was the direct calculated result of a cosmic crime. The ancient texts, particularly the non-canonical Book of Enoch, give us a window into this event. It tells of a specific order of angels, the Watchers, who were dispatched with a sacred duty to watch over and guide the fledgling human race. But as they watched, their divine nature became corrupted by mortal desire. They looked upon the daughters of men and were consumed by a lust that led them to abandon their heavenly station, their sacred purpose, and their loyalty to God. This was no momentary lapse in judgment. It was a premeditated conspiracy against the Creator. The Book of Enoch describes how these fallen angels, led by a figure named Semjaza, gathered on a mountain and swore a binding oath to one another. They knew the gravity of their sin and bound themselves together with curses, ensuring none would back out of their pact. They made a conscious decision to violate the most fundamental law of creation, the separation of realms. They descended, took human wives for themselves, and taught them forbidden knowledge, sorcery, the art of war, and seductions that humanity was never meant to possess. This wasn't just a sin of passion, it was a deliberate act of cosmic rebellion, an attempt to merge two worlds that God had intentionally kept apart. They didn't just fall from grace, they leapt, dragging a piece of heaven into the muck with them. From this profane and forbidden union, a new race was born, an abominable hybrid that had no place in God's ordered world. These were the Nephilim. They were not fully divine, nor were they fully human. They were a perversion, a living testament to their father's sin. Imagine the spiritual and physical chaos of their existence. They were the children of a cosmic crime, embodying the discord and rebellion from which They were conceived. Their very being was an affront to the natural order, a walking, breathing violation of divine law. This is the crucial context we need to understand. The Nephilim were never meant to be. They were the monstrous offspring of the fallen angels, a consequence that would soon unleash an unparalleled wave of destruction upon the world, proving just how catastrophic it is to break the boundaries God has set. And what exactly was the nature of these monstrous children? What happened when the raw power of an angel was poured into the flesh of a man? So, we have this unholy union between the fallen angels and human women. But what was the actual result? What kind of creature is born from such a forbidden act? My friend, when you pour celestial power into a mortal vessel that wasn't designed for it, you don't get a hero. You get a monster. The word giant that we read in the Bible is just the beginning of the story. The Book of Enoch paints a much more detailed and horrifying picture of the Nephilim. It claims these beings grew to a truly colossal stature, describing them as being 300 cubits tall. Let that sink in for a moment. That's roughly 450 feet, or about 137 meters. We are not talking about a very tall basketball player. We are talking about beings that would tower over our modern skyscrapers. They were born with the superhuman strength of their angelic fathers, a raw, untamed power that no mortal could ever hope to challenge or withstand. These were the true giants of Genesis, walking mountains of flesh and bone. But their terrifying physical nature was only half of the horror. The truly monstrous part of the Nephilim was what they lacked on the inside. Think about this. A human being is a composite of body, soul, and spirit, created in the image of God. This divine spark, our spirit, is what allows us to connect with our Creator, to feel conviction, to know love, and to have a conscience. But the Nephilim were an unnatural creation, a hybrid abomination. They possessed a physical body and a kind of life force or soul, but they lacked a legitimate God-given human spirit. They were a spiritual dead end, a glitch in creation. Can you imagine the existence? To have immense, almost limitless power, but to be completely cut off from the divine, from any sense of purpose or morality. They were a void, an emptiness wrapped in a body of immense strength. This combination of titanic strength and profound spiritual emptiness is what made them so uniquely terrifying. What happens when you have a being with no soul, no conscience, and no connection to anything higher than itself? What drives it? The answer is simple and brutal: appetite. Pure, unadulterated, insatiable appetite. They were creatures of pure brute force, driven by the most basic and primal instincts to consume and to dominate. There was no love in them, no empathy, no higher calling. There was only a gnawing, cavernous hunger, a hunger for food, for power, for violence. This spiritual vacuum created a being that was nothing more than a force of nature, a living engine of consumption. And a void, as we know, must always be filled. This ravenous hunger would soon turn the entire world into their personal feeding ground, leading to an apocalypse of blood and cannibalism that the earth had never seen before. So, my friend, what happens when you unleash a race of soulless, superpowered beings driven by nothing but a bottomless, gnawing hunger? You get a living hell on earth. This is the terrifying heart of the story, the part that's so gruesome it's often ignored, but it's laid out in horrifying detail within the pages of the Book of Enoch. This was the Cannibal Apocalypse. At first, the ravenous appetite of the Nephilim targeted the works of man. They consumed everything humanity could possibly produce, every bushel of grain, every head of livestock, every drop of wine. Imagine an entire world toiling under the sun, not for their own survival, but just to temporarily satisfy the hunger of their monstrous overlords, these terrible giants of Genesis. But it was a fool's errand. The more they were fed, the hungrier they seemed to become. They bled the world's resources completely dry until there was nothing left that man had made. When the pantries and fields were barren, their gaze turned toward the wild. They began to devour the beasts of the earth, the birds of the air, and even the fish in the sea. The natural order was shattered as these colossal abominations, the result of the sin of the fallen angels, stomped across creation, consuming everything in their path. But even the entire animal kingdom wasn't enough to fill the spiritual void that festered inside them. And that's when the ultimate line was crossed, plunging the world into a nightmare from which there seemed to be no escape. They turned on humanity. They began to hunt men, women, and children, not just for sport or power, but for food. The Book of Enoch describes this horror explicitly, stating they began to devour one another's flesh and drink the blood. This was the reign of the Nephilim, a bloody, cannibalistic terror where humanity became the livestock. And in the final, most depraved act of their gluttony, when their hunger still raged, they turned on each other, giant against giant, in a grotesque war of self-consumption. The world wasn't just chaotic, it was actively devouring itself from the inside out. Now I want you to try and picture the sheer scale of that carnage, the absolute horror that had consumed the world. Imagine a planet drowning not in water but in its own blood, groaning under the weight of the endless violence of the Nephilim. When suffering becomes so absolute, so all-consuming that there are no innocent voices left to even cry out for help, what happens? Who speaks for the dead and the devoured? My friend, this is where the story takes a turn that is both mystical and deeply profound. The ancient texts, especially the Book of Enoch, tell us that the very earth itself could no longer endure. The defilement, the ground saturated with the blood of the innocent and corrupted by the lawless deeds of the giants of Genesis, began to cry out. Can you feel the weight of that? The planet itself, a living creation, groaning in agony. The mountains that witnessed the slaughter, the rivers that were choked with filth, the very air that was thick with the stench of death. All of creation was in torment. The text says the earth, stripped of its inhabitants and its purity, made its cry heard even to the gates of heaven. This wasn't just a human problem anymore. The entire physical world was being violated by these unnatural monsters born from the rebellion of the fallen angels. This desperate, elemental cry of agony ripped through the cosmos, forcing the celestial realm to bear witness. The archangels looked down and saw a world that was broken, a creation that was hemorrhaging, and they carried the desperate plea of the tormented earth and the souls of the slain directly before the throne of God. The time for watching was over. Heaven had to respond, and so heaven did respond. This brings us to the story of the Great Flood, an event we all think we know. But I'm asking you now to set aside the version from children's storybooks with the pairs of cute animals lining up peacefully. Seen through the lens of this cosmic corruption, the deluge takes on a much more grim and specific purpose. Within this lore, the flood wasn't just a punishment for mankind's wickedness, though that was certainly a factor. No, it was something more akin to a radical planetary sterilization. It was a controlled burn designed to purge a contamination that had seeped into the very bedrock of creation. The core issue wasn't just bad behavior, it was a deep physical and genetic defilement. The unholy DNA of the fallen angels passed down to their monstrous offspring, the Nephilim, had created a wound in the world that could not be healed. It was a spiritual and biological cancer, and the only cure was to wash the world clean. Think of it as a divine reset, not just of morality, but of biology itself. The bloodline of the giants of Genesis had to be completely and utterly eradicated. God wasn't just hitting a restart button on society, he was performing a painful cosmic surgery to remove a tumor that threatened all life. The floodwaters were the only antiseptic powerful enough to cleanse the earth of their physical taint, to dissolve their colossal bones, and to ensure that the human lineage, through the pure bloodline of Noah, could start anew. But while the water could destroy their bodies, a terrifying question remained. What happens to the powerful, disembodied spirits of the Nephilim? The answer to that question reveals an even more insidious curse, giving us the true origin of demons. The flood was a perfect physical solution to a physical problem. It washed the world clean, dissolving the colossal bodies of the giants of Genesis and wiping their material presence from the face of the earth. But this, my friend, leads us to the most chilling and crucial revelation in this entire saga, the answer to the question of their spirits. This is the lingering curse, the part of the story that connects an ancient apocalypse to the spiritual warfare we face this very day. According to the ancient Book of Enoch, when the Nephilim were killed, their spirits had nowhere to go. They were an unnatural hybrid, a cosmic mistake. They weren't divine beings who could return to a celestial realm, nor were they human souls who would go to the place of the dead. So, a unique judgment was passed upon them. Their spirits would be cursed to remain on the earth, disembodied, invisible, and hungry. This is the shocking truth, the real origin of demons. The evil spirits that Jesus cast out, the demonic forces that the apostles battled, the very entities that seek to torment humanity today, according to this law, they are not the original fallen angels. Those angels were bound and imprisoned, awaiting their own final judgment. No, the demons that plague us are the restless, malignant ghosts of the dead Nephilim. Think of the terrifying implications. A being born of rebellion, who knew only brute force and insatiable appetite, is now stripped of its body but retains its malevolent will. It is a vortex of pure hunger and hatred, now invisible, cursed to wander the earth until the final judgment, and it despises humanity with every fiber of its being. Its only satisfaction comes from afflicting the creation it can no longer physically devour, causing sickness, madness, and spiritual oppression. The flood cleansed the world's hardware, but it left a malicious, viral software running in the background. Now, this is the point where a sharp student of the scriptures, someone like yourself, would rightly raise a hand and ask, but wait a minute. If the Great Flood was a planetary sterilization event that wiped out the Nephilim, then why do we read about giants after the flood? It's a critical question. When the 12 spies return from the land of Canaan in the Book of Numbers, they give a terrifying report, saying they saw the sons of Anak, who they claim come from the Nephilim. And of course there's the most famous post-flood giant of all, Goliath, the champion of the Philistines. How can this be if the original giants of Genesis were completely destroyed? My friend, this is a subject of deep theological debate, and exploring the possibilities reveals the enduring and complex legacy of this corruption. There isn't one simple answer, but several compelling theories. One school of thought suggests that the sin of the fallen angels happened again, though perhaps on a much smaller scale. This theory posits another, more limited incursion that led to new lines of giants. Another idea is that the genetic stain wasn't entirely purified, that perhaps through one of Noah's daughters-in-law, a recessed gene was carried onto the ark. A third and very powerful perspective is that the disembodied spirits of the dead, Nephilim, the very origin of demons we just discussed, specifically targeted and influenced certain human bloodlines, empowering them and driving them toward gigantism and violence to create a physical echo of what they once were. Or perhaps the simplest explanation is that the terror of the original giants was so great that their name, Nephilim, became a catch-all term for any formidable, terrifying warrior tribe, a name used by the spies to express their extreme fear rather than a direct biological link. Whatever the case, it's clear the shadow of these beings loomed long after the flood. As we draw the threads of this incredible and terrifying saga together, my friend, what is the ultimate lesson we are meant to take away from it all? When you strip away the colossal bodies, the cosmic wars, and the ancient apocalypses, you are left with a single, timeless, and profoundly important truth. The story of the Nephilim is the ultimate cautionary tale about the consequences of violating divine order. It's a powerful, gut-wrenching lesson on the chaos that is unleashed when the sacred boundaries established by God are broken. Think about it. Heaven has its order, and earth has its order. Angels have their designated role, and humanity has its own. These realms and roles were separated by God for a reason, for balance, for purity, for peace. The entire catastrophe, from the sin of the fallen angels to the bloody reign of the giants of Genesis, was set in motion by a single act of transgression. A group of beings decided that God's boundaries did not apply to them. They crossed a line that was never meant to be crossed. The result wasn't enlightenment or freedom, it was corruption, monstrosity, and the near-total annihilation of the world. This narrative serves as a divine warning, written in the blood and tears of the pre-flood world, that our own spiritual safety and the order of the cosmos depend on respecting the sacred laws laid down by the Creator. It teaches us that rebellion against God's design, no matter how appealing it may seem in the moment, never leads to a better place. It only ever leads to the creation of monsters, both literal and spiritual, and a chaos that consumes everything it touches. This is not just a story from the Book of Enoch, it is a fundamental principle of spiritual reality. And so this timeless warning, this epic story of a broken law and its monstrous consequences, echoes down through the millennia and lands right here with us in this very moment. We have journeyed together through the shadows of history, uncovering the cosmic crime of the fallen angels and the terrifying truth behind the origin of demons. We've seen how the giants of Genesis, the mighty Nephilim, brought the world to its knees. Now, having explored this forbidden law, I have to turn the question over to you. What do you believe? Do you think these restless, hungry, and disembodied spirits, the cursed souls of the Nephilim, are still wandering our world today, influencing events from the shadows and continuing their ancient war against humanity? I genuinely want to hear your thoughts, so please share your perspective in the comments below. If this journey into one of the Bible's most terrifying stories has opened your eyes, and you're eager to explore more sacred mysteries that lie hidden in the scriptures, then please support this channel by hitting that like button. And if you haven't already, subscribe and ring that notification bell, because you won't want to miss the truths we are going to uncover next.